You can probably tell that I like Marklin's AVR Locos, Marklin's very distinctive rendition of the New York Central S-Type that pulled trains out of Grand Central Station for decades. AVR stands for American Tunnel Loco for Mainline Express trains. Marklin designated its four-wheel electric types V for Volbahn Loc, which is a tunnel locomotive, even though the real engines didn't run mostly through tunnels, as on underground railways. These engines were made in the 1910s before World War I, and I suspect through the 1920s, although they may not have been cataloged in the later years. They came in both clockwork and electric. I have only electrics. Some interesting things about the electric AVRs that Marklin collectors may not know, simply because they haven't seen many of these pretty rare engines. The bodies come with at least two ways of mounting the electric motors inside. On earlier engines, that is the ones made in the 1910s, the screws that hold the motor in go in horizontally, as you can see here. On later engines, which I believe were made after 1920, the screws go into the body vertically, as seen here. And there are at least 5 different types of electric motors found in these engines, including the one with the remote control reverse, which I don't have. The motor in this engine is DC. You can tell not only from the plate, but also because it has these long bronze finger brushes. Notice that this engine also had the New York Central logo factory painted over, so it was probably redirected to a non-US market. These two, one in 1 gauge and one in O gauge, have Marklin motors that are very common in the early 1920s, which is why I think they were made in the early 1920s. These motors are specified for 6 to 8 volts, which is what American toy trains ran on in the early 20s. You can run these with a transformer. Now to this AVR, which is the subject of this video. This one is different. For one thing, notice that instead of the usual brass voltage plate, this one has the house current mains voltage rubber stamped on the side. I emphasize that these numbers are the house current. 110 to 220 is not the voltage that these engines' motors actually run on. The motors actually run on about 30 to 70 volts depending on the engine. In the 1910s, especially in Europe, they used resistances, not transformers, to lower the house current to 30 to 70 volts to run these high voltage AC motors. The next odd thing is the socket for lighting on the back. It's not the usual fiber rectangle piece. I suspect that something like a wafer switch was supposed to be plugged into this. And look at these robust, heavy cast iron wheels. After I finally figured out how to disassemble this engine, this is what I discovered. I had no idea what kind of motor was in this engine until I took it out. It turned out to be a very early Marklin high voltage motor. If it's not the first version, it's the second version. I've only seen one other like this, and that one was not complete. Look at the reverse switch, drum type, heavy brass parts and fiber insulation. And taking the side plate off reveals that this is a double field motor. Some of my later Marklin engines have double field motors. I can tell you that these double field motors like this are unbelievably powerful. Both fields are connected in series by a very fine wire. As I dreaded when I applied current to these fields, no magnetism. I pumped up to 110 volts through these fields, nothing. And that's because of this damage. Someone messing with this engine used the wrong size screw to attach the body and bored into the field, severing the winding. The only way to begin fixing this is to rewind these fields. That is not a priority with me. Some distant day. See, I wasn't kidding you. There's no way we can make this engine run. Someday, after I get experience rewinding less complicated windings, I'll try to tackle this. Lord willing.